ฝ้าติดตามเจ้าชายสิทธัตถะมาทุกย่างก้าวเพื่อไม่ให้พบหนทางบรรลุธรรมเปล่าเนี่ยถ้าคืนปล่อยให้ทำอย่างนี้เจ้าชายจะทำจากบ้านของเราเองให้จงได้
มีพระหทัยตั้งมั่นสงบนิ่ง
เจ้าชายสิทธัตถะนึกว่าท่านจะรอดพ้นจากอำนาจของเราพญาวสวัสดีมารไปได้เมื่ออาวุธและอำนาจของเราไม่สามารถทำร้ายเจ้าชายสิทธัตถะได้เราจะใช้เล่ห์อุบายอย่างอื่นดูเจ้าชายรัตนบัลลังก์ที่ท่านนั่งอยู่เนี่ยเกิดขึ้นมาคู่บารมีของเราให้ผลของเราเป็นพยานให้แก่เราได้ท่านจงลุกขึ้นแล้วคืนให้เราซะดี
ๆดูก่อนพญามารรัตนบัลลังก์นี้เกิดขึ้นเพราะบารมีของเราที่บำเพ็ญเพียรสะสมมาแต่ปางก่อน
ผู้ใดเป็นพยานการเป็นเจ้าของรัตนบัลลังก์ของท่าน
เรานี่แหละพยาน
โอ้พระแม่ธรณี
การบำเพ็ญมหากุศลของพระองค์แม้แต่เพียงน้ำตรวจอุทิศกุศลที่หม่อมฉันใช้มวยผมรองรับไว้บนเศียรเกล้าก็มากพอที่จะนำมาเป็นหลักฐานพยานได้
การมีชัยแก่หมู่มารในครั้งนี้ทำให้พระมหาบุรุษมีพระหฤทัยตั้งมั่นเป็นสมาธิแน่วแน่
Do not be alarmed, O Queen. Mine are only the tears of an old man who knows that he will not live long enough to learn from the teachings of your son.
Will he be a great king?
He'll be the master of the world, or its redeemer.
When he grows older, Sita, he can become a teacher like you if he wants. But first of all, he must follow me and be a king.
It may be as you wish, but the gods often betray the wishes of mortal men.
He will be a king.
Aspel presenta lo que debes saber sobre los nuevos comprobantes fiscales digitales por Internet. Ahora, los comprobantes fiscales digitales deberán actualizarse y cumplir con nuevas obligaciones.
In medieval times, alchemists tried to achieve the seemingly impossible. They wanted to transform lowly lead into gleaming gold. History portrays these people as aged eccentrics, but if only they'd known that their dreams were actually achievable. Indeed, today we can manufacture gold on Earth, thanks to modern inventions that those medieval alchemists missed by a few centuries. But to understand how this precious metal became embedded in our planet to start with, we have to gaze upwards, at the stars. Gold is extraterrestrial. Instead of arising from the planet's rocky crust, it was actually cooked up in space and is present on Earth because of cataclysmic stellar explosions called supernovae. Stars are mostly made up of hydrogen, the simplest and lightest element. The enormous gravitational pressure of so much material compresses and triggers nuclear fusion in the star's core. This process releases energy from the hydrogen, making the star shine. Over many millions of years, fusion transforms hydrogen into heavier elements, helium, carbon, and oxygen, burning subsequent elements faster and faster to reach iron and nickel. However, at that point, nuclear fusion no longer releases enough energy, and the pressure from the core peters out. The outer layers collapse into the center, and bouncing back from this sudden injection of energy, the star explodes, forming a supernova. The extreme pressure of a collapsing star is so high that subatomic protons and electrons are forced together in the core, forming neutrons. Neutrons have no repelling electric charge, so they're easily captured by the iron group elements. Multiple neutron captures enable the formation of heavier elements that a star under normal circumstances can't form, from silver to gold, past lead, and on to uranium. In extreme contrast to the million-year transformation of hydrogen to helium, the creation of the heaviest elements in a supernova takes place in only seconds. But what becomes of the gold after the explosion? The expanding supernova shockwave propels its elemental debris through the interstellar medium, triggering a swirling dance of gas and dust that condenses into new stars and planets. Earth's gold was likely delivered this way before being kneaded into veins by geothermal activity. Billions of years later, we now extract this precious product by mining it, an expensive process that's compounded by gold's rarity. In fact, all of the gold that we've mined in history could be piled into just 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools, although this represents a lot of mass because gold is about 20 times denser than water. So, can we produce more of this coveted commodity? Actually, yes. Using particle accelerators, we can mimic the complex nuclear reactions that create gold in stars. But these machines can only construct gold atom by atom, so it would take almost the age of the universe to produce 1 gram, at a cost vastly exceeding the current value of gold. So that's not a very good solution. But if we were to reach a hypothetical point where we'd mined all of the Earth's buried gold, there are other places we could look. The ocean holds an estimated 20 million tons of dissolved gold, but at extremely minuscule concentrations, making its recovery too costly at present. Perhaps one day we'll see gold rushes to tap the mineral wealth of the other planets of our solar system. And who knows, maybe some future supernova will occur close enough to shower us with its treasure, and hopefully not eradicate all life on Earth in the process. You've been stranded thousands of miles from home with no money or possessions. Such a predicament would make many people despair and curse their awful fate. But for Zeno of Cyprus, it became the foundation of his life's work and legacy. The once wealthy merchant lost everything when he was shipwrecked in Athens around 300 BCE. With not much else to do, he wandered into a bookshop, became intrigued by reading about Socrates, and proceeded to seek out and study with the city's noted philosophers. As Zeno began educating his own students, he originated the philosophy known as Stoicism, whose teachings of virtue, tolerance, and self-control have inspired generations of thinkers and leaders. The name Stoicism comes from the Stoa Poikile, the decorated public colonnade where Zeno and his disciples gathered for discussion. Today, we colloquially use the word stoic to mean someone who remains calm under pressure and avoids emotional extremes. But while this captures important aspects of Stoicism, the original philosophy was more than just an attitude. The Stoics believed that everything around us operates according to a web of cause and effect, resulting in a rational structure of the universe, which they called logos. And while we may not always have control over the events affecting us, we can have control over how we approach things. Rather than imagining an ideal society, the Stoic tries to deal with the world as it is, while pursuing self-improvement through 4 cardinal virtues. Practical wisdom, the ability to navigate complex situations in a logical, informed, and calm manner. Temperance, the exercise of self-restraint and moderation in all aspects of life. Justice, treating others with fairness even when they have done wrong. And courage, not just in extraordinary circumstances, but facing daily challenges with clarity and integrity. As Seneca, one of the most famous Roman Stoics, wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." But while Stoicism focuses on personal improvement, it's not a self-centered philosophy. At a time when Roman laws considered slaves as property, Seneca called for their humane treatment and stressed that we all share the same fundamental humanity. Nor does Stoicism encourage passivity. The idea is that only people who have cultivated virtue and self-control in themselves can bring positive change in others.
Between 2008 and 2012, archaeologists excavated the rubble of an ancient hospital in England. In the process, they uncovered a number of skeletons. One in particular belonged to a wealthy male who lived in the 11th or 12th century and died of leprosy between the ages of 18 and 25. How do we know all this? Simply by examining some old soil-caked bones? Even centuries after death, skeletons carry unique features that tell us about their identities. And using modern tools and techniques, we can read those features as clues. This is a branch of science known as biological anthropology. It allows researchers to piece together details about ancient individuals and identify historical events that affected whole populations. When researchers uncover a skeleton, some of the first clues they gather, like age and gender, lie in its morphology, which is the structure, appearance, and size of a skeleton. Bones like the clavicle stop growing at age 25, so a skeleton with the clavicle that hasn't fully formed must be younger than that. Similarly, the plates in the cranium can continue fusing up to age 40 and sometimes beyond. By combining these with some microscopic skeletal clues, physical anthropologists can estimate an approximate age of death. Meanwhile, pelvic bones reveal gender. Biologically, female pelvises are wider, allowing women to give birth, whereas males are narrower. Bones also betray the signs of ancient disease. Disorders like anemia leave their traces on the bones. And the condition of teeth can reveal clues to factors like diet and malnutrition, which sometimes correlate with wealth or poverty. A protein called collagen can give us even more profound details. The air we breathe, water we drink, and food we eat leaves permanent traces in our bones and teeth in the form of chemical compounds. These compounds contain measurable quantities called isotopes. Stable isotopes in bone collagen and tooth enamel varies among mammals, dependent on where they lived and what they ate. So, by analyzing these isotopes, we can draw direct inferences regarding the diet and location of historic people. Not only that, but during life, bones undergo a constant cycle of remodeling. So if someone moves from one place to another, bones synthesized after that move will also reflect the new isotopic signatures of the surrounding environment. That means that skeletons can be used like migratory maps. For instance, between 1 and 650 AD, the great city of Teotihuacan in Mexico bustled with thousands of people. Researchers examined the isotope ratios in skeletons' tooth enamel, which held details of their diets when they were young. They found evidence for significant migration into the city. A majority of the individuals were born elsewhere. With further geological and skeletal analysis, they may be able to map where those people came from. That work in Teotihuacan is also an example of how bioanthropologists study skeletons in cemeteries and mass graves, then analyze their similarities and differences. From that information, they can learn about cultural beliefs, social norms, wars, and what caused their deaths. Today, we use these tools to answer big questions about how forces like migration and disease shape the modern world. DNA analysis is even possible in some relatively well-preserved ancient remains. That's helping us understand how diseases like tuberculosis have evolved over the centuries, so we can build better treatments for people today. Ancient skeletons can tell us a surprisingly great deal about the past. So if your remains are someday buried intact, what might archaeologists of the distant future learn from them?
Since the dawn of humanity, an estimated 100.8 billion people have lived and died, a number that increases by about 0.8% of the world's population each year. What happens to all of those people's bodies after they die? And will the planet eventually run out of burial space? When a person's heart stops beating, the body passes through several stages before it begins decomposing. Within minutes after death, the blood begins settling in the lowermost parts of the body. Usually 8 to 12 hours later, the skin in those areas is discolored by livor mortis, or post-mortem stain. And while at the moment of death the body's muscles relax completely in a condition called primary flaccidity, they stiffen about 2 to 6 hours later in what's known as rigor mortis. This stiffening spreads through the muscles, and its speed can be affected by age, gender, and the surrounding environment. The body also changes temperature, usually cooling off to match its environment. Next comes decomposition, the process by which bacteria and insects break apart the body. Many factors affect the rate of decomposition. There is, however, a basic guide of the effect of the environment on decomposition called Casper's Law. It says that if all other factors are equal, a body exposed to air decomposes twice as fast as one immersed in water, and 8 times as fast as one buried in earth. Soil acidity also greatly affects bone preservation. High acidity soils with a pH of less than 5.3 will rapidly decompose bone, whereas in a neutral or basic soil with a pH of 7 or more, a skeleton can remain in relatively good condition for centuries. Different cultures throughout history have developed unique approaches to burials. As far back as the first Neanderthal burials, death was accompanied by rituals like the positioning, coloring, or decorating of corpses. Traditional Christian burials decorate the body in dress, while in traditional Islam, a body is wrapped in a piece of ritual fabric with the face oriented toward Mecca. Traditional Hindus ceremonially burn the body, and Zoroastrians, followers of one of the oldest monotheistic religions, traditionally place bodies atop a tower to expose them to the sun and scavenging birds. Before the Industrial Revolution, burials were simple and accessible. These days, with suitable burial land running out in high population areas, purchasing private grave sites can be costly, and many people can't afford simple burials. Even cremation, the second most common burial practice in the world, comes with a high cost. As for the question of running out of space, the issue isn't so much about total land in the world as it is that large populations cluster together within cities. Most of the big cities in the world may run out of suitable burial grounds within a century. For London, it's even sooner. That may happen by 2035. So are there alternatives to traditional burials that might help with the space issue? In some countries, skyscraper cemeteries enable vertical burials. Some options focus on the body's relationship with the environment. Promession, for example, freeze-dries and pulverizes the body, creating a powder that can turn into compost when mixed with oxygen and water. There are also green burials that use special materials such as biodegradable caskets, urns that sprout trees, and burial suits that grow mushrooms. Eternal reefs take that concept to the depths of the ocean, using a mixture of ashes and cement to create marine habitats for sea life. Death is an inevitable part of the human condition, but how we treat bodies in burials continues to evolve. We may each have different spiritual, religious, or practical approaches to dying, but the ever-increasing demand for burial space might give us a push to be creative about where our bodies go after the final stages of life. Sunken relics, ghostly shipwrecks, and lost cities. These aren't just wonders found in fictional adventures. Beneath the ocean's surface, there are ruins where people once roamed and shipwrecks loaded with artifacts from another time. This is the domain of underwater archaeology, where researchers discover and study human artifacts that slipped into the sea. They're not on a treasure hunt. Underwater archaeology reveals important information about ancient climates and coastlines. It tells us how humans sailed the seas and what life was like millennia ago. So what exactly can we find? At shallow depths, mingled in with modern-day items, we've discovered all sorts of ancient artifacts. This zone contains evidence of how our ancestors fished, how they repaired their ships, disposed of their trash, and even their convicted pirates, who were buried below the tide line. And it's not just our recent history. 800,000-year-old footprints were found along the shore in Norfolk, Britain. In these shallow depths, the remains of sunken cities also loom up from the seafloor, deposited there by earthquakes, tsunamis, and Earth's sinking plates. Almost every sunken city can be found at these shallow depths because the sea level has changed little in the several thousand years that city-building civilizations have existed. For instance, in shallow waters off the coast of Italy lies Baia, a Roman seaside town over 2,000 years old. There, it's possible to swim among the ruins of structures built by Rome's great families, senators, and emperors. And then there are shipwrecks. As ships grow too old for use, they're usually abandoned near shore in out-of-the-way places like estuaries, rivers, and shallow bays. Archaeologists use these like a timeline to map a harbor's peaks and declines, and to get clues about the historic art of shipbuilding. At Roskilde in Denmark, for example, 5 purposefully sunken vessels reveal how Vikings crafted their fearsome long ships 1,000 years ago. When we descend a bit further, we reach the zone where the deepest human structures lie, like ancient harbor walls and quays. We also see more shipwrecks sunk by storms, war, and collisions. We're still excavating many of these wrecks today, like Blackbeard's ship, which is revealing secrets about life as an 18th century pirate. But past 50 feet, there are even deeper, better preserved shipwrecks, like the wreck at Antikythera, which sank during the 1st century BC. When it was discovered, it contained statues, trade cargo, and also the earliest known computer, a mysterious device called the Antikythera mechanism that kept track of astronomical changes and eclipses. Today, it gives archaeologists vital information about the knowledge possessed by the ancient Greeks. It is in this zone that we also begin to find aircraft and submarines, such as those from the World Wars. Plunging as deep as 200 feet, we can find some of the earliest and rarest signs of human history. Prior to 5,000 years ago, there was a lot more dry land because glaciers trapped much of the water that now forms the sea. Our ancestors spread across these lands, and so on the seafloor, we find their camps, stone tools, and the bones of animals they hunted. These sites give us invaluable knowledge about our ancestors' migration patterns, hunting methods, and technologies. In the deepest zone, no human has ever walked. This area has been submerged since well before mankind evolved. The only artifacts we find are those that have drifted down from above, like NASA's Saturn V rocket engines at 14,000 feet, and the deepest shipwrecks. The ocean is like a huge underwater museum that constantly adds to our knowledge about humanity. With only a fraction of it explored, discoveries are sure to continue long into the future.
A 13,000-mile dragon of earth and stone winds its way through the countryside of China with a history almost as long and serpentine as its structure. The Great Wall began as multiple walls of rammed earth built by individual feudal states during the Chunqiu period to protect against nomadic raiders north of China and each other. When Emperor Qin Shi Huang unified the states in 221 BCE, the Tibetan Plateau and Pacific Ocean became natural barriers. But the mountains in the north remained vulnerable to Mongol, Turkish, and Xiongnu invasions. To defend against them, the emperor expanded the small walls built by his predecessors, connecting some and fortifying others. As the structures grew from Lingtao in the west to Liaodong in the east, they collectively became known as the Long Wall. To accomplish this task, the emperor enlisted soldiers and commoners, not always voluntarily. Of the hundreds of thousands of builders recorded during the Qin dynasty, many were forcibly conscripted peasants, and others were criminals serving out sentences. Under the Han dynasty, the wall grew longer still, reaching 3,700 miles and spanning from Dunhuang to the Bohai Sea. Forced labor continued under the Han Emperor Han Wudi, and the wall's reputation grew into a notorious place of suffering. Poems and legends of the time told of laborers buried in nearby mass graves or even within the wall itself. And while no human remains have been found inside, grave pits do indicate that many workers died from accidents, hunger, and exhaustion. The wall was formidable, but not invincible. Both Genghis and his son Kublai Khan managed to surmount the wall during the Mongol invasion of the 13th century. After the Ming dynasty gained control in 1368, they began to refortify and further consolidate the wall using bricks and stones from local kilns. Averaging 23 feet high and 21 feet wide, the wall's 5,500 miles were punctuated by watchtowers. When raiders were sighted, fire and smoke signals traveled between towers until reinforcements arrived. Small openings along the wall let archers fire on invaders, while larger ones were used to drop stones and more. But even this new and improved wall was not enough. In 1644, northern Manchu clans overthrew the Ming to establish the Qing dynasty, incorporating Mongolia as well. Thus, for the second time, China was ruled by the very people the wall had tried to keep out. With the empire's borders now extending beyond the Great Wall, the fortifications lost their purpose. And without regular reinforcement, the wall fell into disrepair. Rammed earth eroded, while brick and stone were plundered for building materials. But its job wasn't finished. During World War II, China used sections for defense against Japanese invasion, and some parts are still rumored to be used for military training. But the wall's main purpose today is cultural. As one of the largest man-made structures on Earth, it was granted UNESCO World Heritage status in 1987. Originally built to keep people out of China, the Great Wall now welcomes millions of visitors each year. In fact, the influx of tourists has caused the wall to deteriorate, leading the Chinese government to launch preservation initiatives. It's also often acclaimed as the only man-made structure visible from space. Unfortunately, that's not at all true. In low Earth orbit, all sorts of structures like bridges, highways, and airports are visible, and the Great Wall is only barely discernible. From the moon, it doesn't stand a chance. But regardless, it's the Earth we should be studying it from, because new sections are still discovered every few years, branching off from the main body and expanding this remarkable monument to human achievement.
Where did Russia come from? Why is it so big? And what are the differences between it and its neighbors? The answers lie in an epic story of seafaring warriors, nomadic invaders, and the rise and fall of a medieval state known as Kievan Rus. In the first millennium, a large group of tribes spread through the dense woodlands of Eastern Europe. Because they had no writing system, much of what we know about them comes from three main sources: archaeological evidence, accounts from literate scholars of the Roman Empire and the Middle East, and lastly, an epic history called the Primary Chronicle, compiled in the 12th century by a monk named Nestor. What they tell us is that these tribes, who shared a common Slavic language and polytheistic religion, had by the 7th century split into western, southern, and eastern branches, the latter stretching from the Dniester River to the Volga and the Baltic Sea. As Nestor's story goes, after years of subjugation by Vikings from the north, who, by the way, did not wear horned helmets in battle, the region's tribes revolted and drove back the Northmen. But left to their own devices, they turned on each other. Such chaos ensued that, ironically, the tribes reached out to the foreigners they had just expelled, inviting them to return and establish order. The Vikings accepted, sending a prince named Rurik and his two brothers to rule. With Rurik's son Oleg expanding his realm into the south and moving the capital to Kiev, a former outpost of the Khazar Empire, the Kievan Rus was born. Rus most likely deriving from an Old Norse word for the men who row. The new princedom had complex relations with its neighbors, alternating between alliance and warfare with the Khazar and Byzantine empires, as well as neighboring tribes. Religion played an important role in politics, and as the legend goes, in 987, the Rus prince Vladimir I decided it was time to abandon Slavic paganism and send emissaries to explore neighboring faiths. Put off by Islam's prohibition on alcohol and Judaism's expulsion from its Holy Land, the ruler settled on Orthodox Christianity after hearing odd accounts of its ceremonies. With Vladimir's conversion and marriage to the Byzantine emperor's sister, as well as continued trade along the Volga route, the relationship between the two civilizations deepened. Byzantine missionaries created an alphabet for Slavic languages based on a modified Greek script, while Rus Viking warriors served as the Byzantine emperor's elite guard. For several generations, the Kievan Rus flourished from its rich resources and trade. Its noblemen and noblewomen married prominent European rulers, while residents of some cities enjoyed great culture, literacy, and even democratic freedoms uncommon for the time. But nothing lasts forever. Fratricidal disputes over succession began to erode central power, as increasingly independent cities ruled by rival princes vied for control. The Fourth Crusade and decline of Constantinople devastated the trade integral to Rus wealth and power, while Teutonic crusaders threatened northern territories. The final blow, however, would come from the east. Consumed by their squabbles, Rus princes paid little attention to the rumors of a mysterious, unstoppable horde. until 1237, when 35,000 mounted archers, led by Batu Khan, swept through the Rus cities, sacking Kiev before continuing on to Hungary and Poland. The age of Kievan Rus had come to an end, its people now divided. In the east, which remained under Mongol rule, a remote trading post known as Moscow would grow to challenge the power of the Khans, conquering parts of their fragmenting empire, and in many ways succeeding it. As it absorbed other Eastern Rus territories, it reclaimed the old name in its Greek form, Russia. Meanwhile, the western regions, whose leaders had avoided destruction through political maneuvering until the horde withdrew, came under the influence of Poland and Lithuania. For the next few centuries, the former lands of Kievan Rus, populated by Slavs, ruled by Vikings, taught by Greeks, and split by Mongols, would develop differences in society, culture, and language that remain to the present day. He was one of the most fearsome warlords who ever lived, waging an unstoppable conquest across the Eurasian continent. But was Genghis Khan a vicious barbarian or a unifier who paved the way for the modern world? We'll see in History versus Genghis Khan.
Order, order. Now, who's the defendant today? Khan!
I see Your Honor is familiar with Genghis Khan, the 13th century warlord whose military campaigns killed millions and left nothing but destruction in their wake. Objection. First of all, it's pronounced Chinggis Khan.
Really?
In Mongolia, yes. Regardless, he was one of the greatest leaders in human history. Born Temujin, he was left fatherless and destitute as a child, but went on to overcome constant strife to unite warring Mongol clans and forge the greatest empire the world had seen, eventually stretching from the Pacific to Europe's heartland. And what was so great about invasion and slaughter? Northern China lost 2/3 of its population. The Jin dynasty had long harassed the northern tribes, paying them off to fight each other and periodically attacking them. Chinggis Khan wasn't about to suffer the same fate as the last Han who tried to unite the Mongols, and the demographic change may reflect poor census keeping, not to mention that many peasants were brought into the Han's army. You can pick apart numbers all you want, but they wiped out entire cities, along with their inhabitants. The Han preferred enemies to surrender and pay tribute, but he firmly believed in loyalty and diplomatic law. The cities that were massacred were ones that rebelled after surrendering, or killed his ambassadors. His was a strict understanding of justice. Multiple accounts show his army's brutality going beyond justice, ripping unborn children from mothers' wombs, using prisoners as human shields or moat fillers to support siege engines, taking all women from conquered towns.
Enough! How barbaric!
Is that really so much worse than other medieval armies? That doesn't excuse justice, ripping unborn children from mothers' wombs, using prisoners as human shields or moat fillers to support siege engines, taking all women from conquered towns.
Enough! How barbaric!
Is that really so much worse than other medieval armies? That doesn't excuse justice, ripping unborn children from mothers' wombs, using prisoner shields or moat fillers to support siege engines, taking all women from conquered towns.
Enough! How barbaric!
Is that really so much worse than other medieval armies? That doesn't excuse